My daughter told me my ex's boyfriend was a better father than me, so I disinherited her and took away her $85K college fund. But when he betrayed her, she came back begging for forgiveness, and what I did left them speechless. I'm 42 years old, work in corporate finance, and I've spent the last 2 years trying to process how my relationship with my daughter completely fell apart and how I'm trying to rebuild it now, if that's even possible. Emily is 16 now, but when all this started, she was 14. And honestly, up until that point, I thought we were close. I mean, we weren't one of those dads and daughters who tell each other everything, but we had our moments, you know? We'd go to breakfast on Sundays, she'd ask me for help with math, we'd watch movies together. Nothing extraordinary, but it was enough, or so I thought. Everything started going to hell when my marriage to Heather collapsed after 16 years. It wasn't one of those separations where you just realize you don't work as a couple anymore and decide to go your separate ways in a mature and civilized way. No. It was an absolute disaster because I discovered that Heather had been having an emotional affair with a guy from her work, Austin, for months. When I say emotional, I mean they technically hadn't had sex yet, but they were at that stage where they already shared absolutely everything, texted all day, confessed intimate things to each other. Basically, they were already in a relationship just without the physical component. I found out in the most cliché way possible, checking her phone one night when she left it on the table while she showered. Yeah, I know, invasion of privacy and all that, but I'd been feeling for months like something wasn't right. She was distant, always on her phone. And that night, something in me just said, check it. And there they were, hundreds of messages, photos, future plans, everything. I felt like an idiot, honestly, because I'd spent months feeling guilty for being suspicious while she basically already had one foot out of our marriage. The divorce was long and painful, like a whole year of lawyers and fights and asset division, and during all that time I tried to keep things as normal as possible with Emily. She was 13 when the whole process started, and obviously knew her parents were getting divorced, but I didn't tell her the details of why. I thought she didn't need to know about her mother's affair at that age. Heather didn't tell her anything at first either, I guess out of shame or because she knew it would look bad. So Emily was confused and sad, but seemed to handle it relatively well. She went to therapy, talked to her counselor at school. I tried to be consistent with visits and calls. But then the divorce was finalized. That was about 2.5 years ago, and Heather wasted no time making her relationship with Austin official. Like 3 months after the divorce papers came through, Austin was practically living in the house that had been ours, where Heather now lived with Emily. And this is where things got weird. Emily suddenly started talking to me about Austin all the time. Like, Austin this, Austin that. Austin took me to the movies. Austin helped me with my science project. Austin is so funny. At first, I tried to be the mature and understanding dad. I mean, I understood that my daughter needed to adapt to the new family dynamic and that it was normal for her to get to know her mother's new partner. But over time, I started noticing that she wasn't just speaking well of Austin, she practically worshipped him. And at the same time, she started distancing herself from me. The visits became tense. She'd come to my house, which I now shared with my sister Dorothy. She'd moved in with me after the divorce because she was going through her own separation, and we needed the mutual support. And Emily would basically lock herself in her room or be glued to her phone. When I tried to talk to her, her responses were monosyllables. How was school? Fine. Want to go somewhere? No thanks. Are you hungry? No. It was heartbreaking to see how the girl who used to hug me when I arrived turned into this cold teenager who clearly didn't want to be there. Dorothy told me it was normal, that it was part of adolescence and adjusting to the divorce, that I needed to give her time and space. And I tried to believe her. I really did. But something inside me knew this was different. It wasn't just typical teenage rebellion. It was like she'd erased me from her list of important people. And then, what basically completely destroyed me happened. It was a Saturday afternoon. She was about 14 and a half, and I'd tried to plan a special day, nothing elaborate. We were just going to go to lunch at her favorite Italian restaurant, and then maybe to the mall or wherever she wanted. But from the moment I picked her up at Heather's house, she was in a bad mood, with that attitude where everything annoys her and everything seems boring. At the restaurant, she barely touched her food, and when I tried to ask her what was wrong, she shot back a, "Nothing's wrong," super curtly. I was already losing patience, honestly, because I'd spent months trying to connect with her and receiving pure rejection. And finally, I told her, "Look, Emily, I know this is hard for you, but it's hard for me too, and I'd like you to at least try." And that's when she looked me directly in the eyes, with an expression I'd never seen on her, like a mixture of coldness and disdain. And she said, "Dad, the truth is that Austin is the father I deserve. He does understand me. He is truly present, not just physically, but emotionally. He says I can count on him for anything, and I really feel that way. You're only here because it's your legal obligation." I can't explain to you how it felt to hear that. It was like they'd ripped my heart out of my chest and stomped on it in front of me. I just sat there, unable to say anything. Literally, the words wouldn't come out, and she kept eating like she hadn't said anything devastating. We finished lunch in silence. I took her back to Heather's house early, and when she got out of the car, she didn't even say goodbye. Just closed the door and left. I drove home on autopilot, and when I got there, Dorothy was in the living room watching TV. She saw my face and immediately knew something bad had happened. I told her everything, and she tried to console me. Told me Emily was being manipulated, that she was a confused teenager, that Austin was probably filling her head with ideas, that Heather should be monitoring that. But I couldn't stop replaying those words in my mind. Austin is the father I deserve. Like I was insufficient. Like all these years hadn't been enough for her. That night, I didn't sleep at all. And the next day, I made a decision that I know a lot of people are going to judge, but that at the time I felt was the only thing I could do to protect myself. I had Emily as the beneficiary of my life insurance, my retirement account, basically everything. I also had a savings fund for her college that I'd been building since she was born, like I had about $85,000 saved there, and I decided to change it all. I called my lawyer the following Monday and told him I wanted to change all my beneficiaries from Emily to Dorothy. I also told him I wanted to use the college fund for other things. He asked me if I was sure that it was an important decision and I should think it through. But I'd already thought about it, or at least that's what I believed. I told him my daughter had made it very clear that she no longer considered me her real father, that she had a new dad who was better than me. So, why should I continue preparing financially for someone who had rejected me so completely? The changes took about 2 weeks to process, and during that time, I continued with Emily's visits. But now, I was the distant one. I didn't initiate conversations, didn't propose activities, basically received her at home and let her do whatever she wanted. If she wanted to stay in her room all weekend, perfect. If she wanted to eat alone, no problem. Dorothy told me I was being immature, that she was the child and I was the adult, but I simply didn't have the emotional energy to keep trying with someone who clearly didn't want me in her life. When all the legal and financial changes were finally completed, I decided to do something for myself for the first time in years. Dorothy had been planning a trip to Europe, specifically to Italy and France, and she asked me if I wanted to go with her. I used part of the money from Emily's college fund, like $15,000, and we went for 3 weeks. It was the best 3 weeks I'd had in a long time, honestly. I didn't think about the divorce, didn't think about Heather, didn't think about Emily's rejection. I just enjoyed good food, good wines, museums, beautiful cities. Dorothy was the best possible company. She understood what I was going through because she'd lived through her own hell with her ex-husband. When we got back, everything exploded. Turns out that during our trip, Emily had tried to contact me several times, not much, but more than usual, and I simply responded with short messages like, "I'm fine, I'm traveling, we'll talk when I get back." I didn't give her details, didn't send her photos, nothing. And apparently that bothered her, or maybe it just made her curious because it wasn't typical of me to travel like that without telling her with more advance notice. The first visit after the trip was extremely uncomfortable. Emily arrived and immediately started with questions. Where had I gone? With whom? For how long? Why hadn't I told her? I responded neutrally. I went to Europe with your Aunt Dorothy. We were there 3 weeks. It was a last-minute trip. She asked how I'd paid for it, like very directly, and I told her I used my savings. It wasn't technically a lie, although she obviously didn't know those savings had originally been hers. But then, I don't know how. I think Heather found out about something or Emily found some document. I'm not sure. But, like 2 weeks later, I received a furious call from Heather telling me how dare I remove Emily as beneficiary and use her college money to go on vacation. I told her that money was mine, that I had saved it, and that I had every right to decide what to do with it. She started yelling at me that I was a horrible father, that I was punishing a child for behaving like a teenager, that I was selfish and resentful. I hung up on her because I wasn't going to stand there listening to that, especially coming from the person who had destroyed our family over an affair. Emily confronted me directly on the next visit. She came into the house and, without even greeting me, said, "Mom, told me you took me out of your will and that you used my college money for your trip. Is it true?" I told her, yes, it was true. And she exploded, started yelling at me. How could I do that to her? That money was for her future, that I was her father and I was supposed to support her. And I, who normally would have tried to calm the situation, simply told her very calmly, "You yourself said that Austin is the father you deserve, that I'm only here out of legal obligation. Well, legally, I don't have to leave you anything or reserve money for you. If Austin is such a good father, let him pay for your college." She was in total shock. I think she didn't expect me to remind her of her own words, and then she burst into tears and ran to her room. Dorothy, who had heard everything from the kitchen, came over and told me, "Richard, that was too much." But I was so full of pain and rage that I didn't care. I felt like I'd finally stopped being the silent victim of this whole situation. The next few weeks were an absolute cold war. Emily kept coming to visits because she legally had to, according to the custody agreement, but she wouldn't speak to me. Not good morning, not good night, nothing. She'd arrive, lock herself in her room, eat alone or not eat, and leave. I didn't make efforts to break the silence either. It was like living with a resentful ghost, every other weekend. Dorothy couldn't take it anymore, and one Saturday when Emily was at the house, she asked to talk to her alone. They were locked in Emily's room for like an hour, and I stayed in the living room trying to watch TV, but couldn't concentrate. When they came out, Dorothy told me she was going out to do some shopping and Emily stayed in her room. I don't know what they said to each other. Dorothy never told me the specific details, just told me it had been an honest and necessary conversation. That night, after dinner in silence as had been the custom lately, Emily knocked on my bedroom door. She asked if we could talk, and I accepted, more out of curiosity than anything else. We sat in the living room, and for the first time in months, we had a real conversation. She started by saying she understood why I was angry, that she'd been very cruel with what she said to me at the restaurant, but that she also felt I had emotionally abandoned her first. She said that after the divorce, I was so consumed in my own sadness and anger that she felt like she didn't have space for her own confusion and pain. That Austin had appeared and had given her attention and had listened to her, and that's why she'd gotten attached to him so quickly. I told her that maybe she was right, that I probably hadn't handled the divorce in the best way in terms of being emotionally present for her, but that it also wasn't fair for her to compare me to a guy who had no real responsibility, who was just playing at being the cool dad without having to deal with the difficult parts of parenting. I told her that her words had destroyed me, that I'd spent 14 years of my life being her father, and that in a single sentence she'd invalidated all of that. She apologized, said she'd said it in a moment of anger and confusion, that she hadn't really meant it. I didn't know whether to believe her or not, but at least we were talking, which was more than we'd done in months. The conversation ended, without any big resolution, just with a mutual understanding that we were both hurt and angry. Things improved a little after that conversation, like she at least talked to me in monosyllables instead of completely ignoring me, but there was still a huge distance between us, and I, honestly, wasn't ready to just forgive and forget. I was still hurt, still felt like I'd been replaced, and remained firm in my decision to keep the financial changes. Then something happened that changed everything again. This was about 6 months ago, so Emily was already 15 and a half. Turns out, Austin, the supposedly perfect father, started showing his true colors. He cheated on Heather, I think with several women from his work, and when Heather confronted him, a horrible drama erupted. But the worst was what happened with Emily. One night, during a fight between Austin and Heather, Emily tried to defend her mom, and Austin turned on her, yelled at her to mind her own business, that she was nobody to judge him, that she was a spoiled and useless kid who was worth nothing. Emily called me that night. It was like 11 at night on a Tuesday, which was weird because normally we didn't talk between visits. I answered, and the first thing I heard were sobs. She asked me if she could come to my house, that it didn't matter, it wasn't my weekend, that she just needed to get out of there. I told her, of course, that I was going to pick her up immediately. When I got to Heather's house, Emily was waiting for me outside with a backpack. She got in the car and started telling me everything, crying, about Austin's infidelity, what he'd said to her, how she felt betrayed because she had trusted him and had defended him even against me. I drove in silence while she vented, and a part of me, the petty and hurt part, wanted to say, I told you so. I warned you. But you know what? I bit my tongue, because I saw my daughter truly devastated and vulnerable for the first time in a long time. When we got home, Dorothy received her with a hug and made tea for everyone. Emily calmed down eventually, and then said something I didn't expect. She said, Dad, I'm so sorry for everything. I'm sorry I told you Austin was a better father than you. I'm sorry I pushed you away. I'm sorry I didn't value you when I had you. You were right. He was just playing at being the fun dad, but when things got tough, he showed who he really was. You would never yell at me like that. You would never tell me I'm worthless. I'm not going to lie. Hearing that felt strange. On one hand, there was a part of me that felt some bitter satisfaction, like a vindication that I'd always been right about Austin. But on the other hand, seeing my daughter that broken hurt me, because even though I was angry with her, she was still my daughter and I didn't want her to suffer. I didn't tell her she was forgiven, or act like everything was suddenly okay. I told her I appreciated her apology, but that I couldn't just forget everything, that it happened so easily, that I needed time to process, and that she also needed to understand that relationships don't repair overnight. She nodded and asked if we could start over, slowly. I told her we could try, but that I needed to see real effort on her part, not just words, but consistent actions that showed me she really wanted to rebuild our relationship. I also told her the financial changes were going to stay for now, that maybe in the future I'd reconsider, but that I needed to be sure she was committed to having a relationship with me for the right reasons, not just because Austin turned out to be a disaster. 6 months have passed since then, and things have gradually improved. Emily makes real efforts, calls me more often, proposes activities together, asks me about my life. Heather and Austin broke up, obviously. He left the house, and as far as I know, Emily hasn't had contact with him since that night. Visits are no longer tense. I mean, there are still awkward moments, and we're still learning to trust each other again. But it's better. Dorothy tells me I should consider restoring Emily as beneficiary and maybe help with college eventually, but I'm still not ready. It's not that I want to punish her forever, but I need to be completely sure this is real and lasting before I put myself in a vulnerable position again. I've been in therapy too, trying to process all the pain from the divorce, from Emily's rejection, from all these years of feeling like a failure as a husband and as a father. Last week, Emily asked me if she could come with me to my next therapy session, said she wanted my therapist to help us navigate our relationship together. I agreed, and we have the joint session scheduled for next Tuesday. I don't know what's going to come of that, but I guess it's a step in the right direction. There are still days when I feel resentful and hurt, days when I think about those words she said to me 2 years ago, and they hurt like it was yesterday. But there are also days when I see my daughter genuinely trying, and I feel some hope that maybe, eventually, we can have a real father-daughter relationship again. It's not going to be the same as what we had before. I'm clear on that. Too many things have happened. But maybe we can build something new. Something more honest and resilient. That's enough for now, I suppose.